There is a version of bodybuilding history that gets retold at every Olympia, on every podcast, and in every gym debate. Dorian Yates was an unstoppable competitor who dominated the sport for 6 consecutive years, collected his trophies, and retired. The narrative is clean, straightforward, and largely uncontested. But the historical record contains something more complicated. There were confrontations backstage, accusations of judged results being manipulated, and a public declaration by one competitor that the reigning champion's run was finished. A declaration met with booing from the crowd. There was also a man who finished second repeatedly, and who later said he had to genuinely hate the champion just to find the motivation to keep competing. That man was Shawn Ray, and for years Dorian Yates said very little about him. Now at 63, Yates has begun speaking at length about Ray, about the rivalry, about the judging decisions that defined it, and about what took place backstage during those years. His account does not align with the version that has circulated since. What follows is a reconstruction of that rivalry based on what both men have said. To understand what made the rivalry between Dorian Yates and Shawn Ray so intense, you have to understand who Dorian Yates was before he ever stepped onto an Olympia stage. That story begins not in a gym, but with the death of his father, a broken shop window, and 6 months in a youth detention center in the English Midlands. Dorian Andrew Yates was born on April 19, 1962, in Solihull, England. He grew up on a small farm in the village of Hurley, outside Birmingham. By most accounts, it was an unremarkable childhood, until his father died of a heart attack when Dorian was 13. He moved with his mother and sister to Birmingham, and without that anchor drifted into trouble quickly. By his mid-teens, he was running with a skinhead gang, steel-toed boots, weekend violence, the full profile. Naturally athletic and broad-shouldered, he had the build for that world but no direction within it. In 1981, riots broke out across Birmingham city centre. Dorian and his friends were caught up in the disorder. One of them tried to steal a hat from a shop mannequin, knocked it over, shattered the window, and the police arrived. Dorian was 18. He was sentenced to 6 months at the Watton Youth Detention Center. Inside Watton, there was a weights room, barbells, dumbbells, standard powerlifting equipment. The detention officers ran inmates through structured routines: bench press, squat, deadlift. The discipline was intentional. What was not anticipated was the effect it had on Dorian Yates. He took to lifting immediately, and he quickly recognized something that would shape the following 2 decades of his life. Out of 300 inmates at Watton, he had the best physique in the facility. The officers treated him differently because of it. The other inmates gave him respect. For a young man who had spent years without either, that recognition was significant. He left Watton with no apartment, no job, and no immediate plan. By his own account, he was essentially homeless after his release, temporarily housed by the city while he found his footing. He took work as a doorman, using his physical presence to earn a living, but he trained through all of it, every day without interruption. By 1983, Yates had begun approaching bodybuilding as a competitive discipline. He started recording every workout in a training journal: weights used, sets completed, how his body felt, what he ate. He has since stated that every session since 1983 is documented. That standard of record keeping, begun that early, reflects the kind of focus he brought to the sport from the start. He entered his first competition at the 1984 Mr. Birmingham Novice Contest and won. He won again the following year. He took the 1986 British Championships and earned his IFBB Pro card in 1988. Then he withdrew from public view. That became his practice. Between contests, he made no media appearances, no guest posing tours, and gave no interviews to the muscle magazines. He trained at Temple Gym in Birmingham, a building he had purchased in 1987, in conditions that were Spartan by design: dim lighting, minimal equipment, high intensity. Training partners regularly left sessions too fatigued to return the following day. No one in the bodybuilding world knew what Yates looked like between competitions. No one knew his off-season weight. When he appeared on stage, the result was consistent: a physique larger, harder, and more developed than anything the field had anticipated. Bodybuilding journalist Peter McGough gave him the name The Shadow, and it held because his absence from public life was as deliberate as everything else about him. He won his first Mr. Olympia in 1992. He was 30 years old and weighed 257 pounds in competition condition. The margin between Yates and the rest of the field that year was not close. The era of extreme mass in professional bodybuilding had begun, and it would continue for the next 6 years. Not everyone accepted it without objection. While Dorian Yates was training in a Birmingham gym with no audience and no public profile, Shawn Ray was building a career of a different kind, winning consistently, cultivating a public image, and becoming one of the most recognized figures the sport had produced. Shawn Irvin Ray was born on September 9, 1965 in Fullerton, California. He began lifting at 11 years old. By 17, he was training with serious intention. By 19, he had accumulated a string of competitive titles across California: Mr. Teenage Los Angeles, Mr. California, and the 1985 Teenage National Championships among them. What distinguished Ray from most competitors was not only his physique, though by conventional standards it was exceptional. At 5'6" and competing between 205 and 215 pounds, he presented a combination of symmetry, proportion, and conditioning that aligned closely with the classical ideals of the sport. His waist was narrow, his shoulders wide, and each muscle group related to the others in a way that judges and audiences consistently recognized. By the established criteria of bodybuilding aesthetics, he was the kind of competitor the sport was designed to reward. Ray was also a public figure in a sport that produced few of them. Outspoken and media-savvy, he had opinions about judging, competition outcomes, and the direction of the sport, and he expressed them openly. He appeared on the cover of Flex magazine more times than any other bodybuilder in the publication's history, co-hosted the Flex magazine workout on ESPN for 5 years, and operated with a comfort in front of cameras and audiences that set him apart from most of his peers. He turned professional in 1987 following his victory at the NPC Nationals. His professional record was substantial: back-to-back Arnold Classic wins in 1990 and 1991, and 12 consecutive top 5 finishes at the Mr. Olympia, spanning from 1988 through 2001 with only brief interruption. The Olympia title, however, remained out of reach. The primary reason was Dorian Yates. When Yates began his run of Olympia victories in 1992, the competitive standard in professional bodybuilding shifted in a direction that Ray found both difficult to match and philosophically objectionable. Yates did not compete on the basis of proportion or classical line. His approach prioritized maximum muscle mass combined with extreme conditioning, the product of high-intensity training, heavy loads, and a recovery-focused methodology that produced a physique unlike anything the sport had seen. On stage, the effect was straightforward. Competitors who stood beside him, regardless of their own level, appeared smaller by comparison. The gap was not a matter of quality, it was a matter of scale. Ray's approach represented a different set of values: proportion, craft, the kind of visual balance that an earlier generation of bodybuilding had treated as the standard. Through much of the 1990s, that standard placed him consistently near the top of the sport, but consistently behind Yates. That position, sustained over years, produced a visible frustration. In Ray's case, frustration tended to find expression in public statements. The rivalry between Dorian Yates and Shawn Ray extended well beyond the competition stage. Much of it played out backstage, in interviews, in magazine articles, and in private confrontations where reputations were contested and pride was at stake. It was a competition fought as much through words and psychology as through physiques. Ray has said in interviews that during the 1990s, he made a deliberate choice. He had to maintain an adversarial mindset toward Yates in order to compete against him. He could not afford familiarity, could not afford to admire the champion, could not afford to lower his guard. He cultivated hostility because it was the drive he needed to keep training year after year. In his view, respecting the man you were trying to beat meant unconsciously accepting defeat. Ray refused to accept it, so he spoke out. He questioned Yates' legitimacy, he questioned the judging, he drew comparisons, pointed to weaknesses, and argued that mass without proportion did not represent the sport's highest standard. Throughout the bodybuilding press of the 1990s, Ray was a persistent voice challenging whether the man winning every year was truly the best competitor. Yates, for his part, largely said nothing. He had a standing rule at Temple Gym. He did not discuss other athletes while training. He kept his focus on his work and trusted that his physique would settle every argument when September arrived. His close friend and training partner Paul Baxendale has described this dynamic in detail. Yates would hear what Ray was saying in the press, respond with a quiet smile, and treat it as additional motivation. While Ray was speaking to the media, Yates was adding size. There were, however, moments when the underlying tension became impossible to contain. At one major competition, Ray's competitive frustration led him past the point of restraint. He made public accusations about what he believed was happening behind the scenes and about the way the event was being conducted. The confrontation that followed, with IFBB official Steve Weinberger, not with Yates, was loud and heated, and it made clear how much pressure had accumulated around this rivalry. Yates, at that same moment, was in his pump-up room preparing to walk on stage. That contrast, Ray pressing his case in the corridors while Yates prepared in silence, became the defining image of their dynamic. One man challenged the sport's politics through his voice. The other addressed everything through his physique. For 6 consecutive years, the physique prevailed. The most significant public moment of the rivalry was still ahead. When it came in 1994, it prompted a lasting reassessment of how bodybuilding judging was perceived. The 1994 Mr. Olympia remains one of the most disputed contests in the history of the sport, not because of who won, but because of the condition the winner was in when he walked on stage. 9 weeks before the show, Dorian Yates was mid-set when he felt something give way in his left arm. His bicep had partially torn. The damage was visible immediately. The muscle bunched up toward the shoulder, distorting the shape of the arm in a way that would be difficult to conceal under stage lighting. In the final weeks before the contest, he was also dealing with illness. He arrived in Atlanta. The 1994 Mr. Olympia was held at the Atlanta Civic Center, managing both the effects of that illness and the lingering damage from the bicep tear. During the front double bicep pose, the asymmetry was obvious. Dorian's left arm did not match his right. His midsection, distended from illness, struggled to come in tight during the front poses. Under normal circumstances, either of those weaknesses could have cost him the title. Shawn Ray arrived at what many insiders considered his personal best: a tight waist, strong proportions, and precise conditioning. He executed the prejudging with consistency. When the results were announced and Dorian Yates took his third consecutive Olympia title, the reaction from within the sport was immediate and pointed. Many competitors and observers believed Shawn Ray had earned the win. They pointed to the front poses, to the visible bicep damage, to Dorian's midsection. The question being raised was how judges could place the title with the man carrying a torn muscle and visible digestive issues. The word that circulated was politics. Accusations of favoritism, of the Weider organization protecting its champion. Shawn Ray was direct about his position. He did not say he had come close to beating Dorian Yates. He said he had beaten him. Dorian's view, which he has discussed in the years since, was straightforward. He acknowledged that he was not at his best in 1994. He said so openly and without qualification. His argument, however, was that bodybuilding is judged as a complete package. His back, his width, his overall mass and conditioning still exceeded what the rest of the lineup brought. Losing individual poses in the front was not the same as losing the contest. In the back poses, the side chest, the rear double bicep, Dorian was dominant. His back in particular was so far beyond anything else on that stage that it carried significant weight in the final assessment. The controversy did not dissipate. It settled into bodybuilding history as the year an injured champion retained his title while a better conditioned challenger was passed over. Some in the sport never accepted the result. Shawn Ray carried the outcome with him for years. His response to it, and what that response cost him, would come next. The year 1997 stands as one of the most documented examples of an athlete competing through compounding physical failure. 3 weeks before the Olympia, on August 31st, 1997, Yates was performing lying triceps extensions in training when he heard a loud bang. Within 36 hours, his entire upper arm had swollen, the triceps visibly distorted, with bruising spreading across the arm. An MRI conducted after the contest confirmed what had occurred. The triceps had been severed from the bone along 3/4 of its length. Yates was preparing to compete in the most significant show in professional bodybuilding with one functional arm, following a recent medical emergency and, by his own assessment, compromised conditioning. He eliminated all pressing movements from his preparation. He trained his healthy arm and his legs, maintained his cardio, and kept his diet precise. On September 20th, 1997, he walked onto the stage at the Terrace Theater. Shawn Ray competed that night. So did Nasser El Sombadi, whom a number of observers believed was denied a win. El Sombadi later described it as the largest judging injustice in the sport's 20th century history. Ray delivered one of the most refined routines of his career, with his symmetry and presentation at a high point. Dorian Yates won his 6th Mr. Olympia. The controversy surrounding that result persisted in the sport for years. The visible damage to Yates's arm, the compromised presentation in certain poses, and the argument that both El Sombadi and Ray had outperformed him in portions of the judging. These became points of ongoing debate. The judges' decision stood, and Yates retired as the reigning champion, the 4th competitor in the history of the Olympia to leave the stage while still holding the title. He never competed again. For Shawn Ray, 1997 marked his final second-place finish at the Olympia. He continued competing through 2001, pursuing a title that had remained just out of reach throughout his career. Without Yates on the stage, the competitive dynamic shifted, and the focused rivalry that had characterized Ray's most consistent years was no longer a factor. The competitive era had ended. What remained was the question of whether the men who had defined it could speak about it plainly. For most of his post-retirement years, Dorian Yates said relatively little about Shawn Ray specifically. He answered general questions about his reign, discussed rivalries in broad terms, and spoke about his challengers' physiques with professional respect. A detailed account of his true feelings about the man who pushed him harder than anyone else in the 90s was not something he offered publicly. In recent years, as both men have moved into their 60s and the sport has evolved well beyond either of them, those conversations have begun to take shape. What has emerged is a picture considerably more complicated than a straightforward narrative of dominance. In various interviews and social media posts, Dorian has acknowledged that Shawn Ray was a level above nearly every other competitor he faced. The combination of conditioning, symmetry, and stage presence that Ray brought was, in Dorian's estimation, elite. He has specifically noted that in 1994 he was not at his best, and that the contest was genuinely close. He has never described the 1994 Olympia as a comfortable win. His position on the outcome, however, has remained consistent. The total package still favored him, not in every round, not in every pose, but overall. He believes the judges assessed the complete picture correctly, even where others disagreed. He has also been direct about a point that tends to get lost. The judging criteria in 1990s bodybuilding were not ambiguous. Mass, conditioning, and symmetry weighted in that order. Shawn had superior symmetry. Dorian had superior mass and conditioning. Under the criteria then in effect, the results were defensible. What Dorian has said about Shawn's psychological approach is equally telling. He found the hostility useful and the public declarations motivating. Every dismissive remark Ray made became fuel. At the same time, Dorian has been clear that he never felt genuine animosity toward Ray as a person. The rivalry was professional, confined to the stage and the competition. Outside that context, the antagonism did not carry over. Shawn, for his part, has stated that the hostility he projected was precisely that, a construct. He needed it to compete. In a December 2024 interview, he said he had to not really like Dorian Yates in order to get himself ready to face him. That was not natural hatred. It was a mental framework built for competitive function. Once the competing stopped, the framework was no longer necessary, and it dissolved. After retirement, the two men who had spent the better part of a decade trying to psychologically and physically outmaneuver each other became genuine friends, the kind where one stays at the other's house. Shawn Ray visited Dorian in the UK and trained with him at Temple Gym after Dorian had already retired from competition. What came out of that visit was one of the most significant realizations of his career. He finally understood what the word intensity meant. Shawn has said as much himself. Until he trained with Dorian Yates at Temple Gym, until he stood in that gym and went through the kind of session Dorian considered a normal workout, he had no real comprehension of what Dorian had been putting himself through for over a decade. Blood and guts wasn't a marketing phrase. It was a literal description of what happened in that gym. The level of effort, the commitment to taking every set to failure and then beyond it, the sheer physical demands of a Dorian Yates training session. Shawn Ray had competed against the results of that training for years without ever understanding what produced them. That understanding changed how he saw the rivalry. He has also spoken about something else that caught him off guard: Dorian's simplicity. Shawn came from California, where success in bodybuilding was associated with a certain kind of lifestyle: nice cars, the beach, the social scene. Dorian was a six-time Mr. Olympia who drove a modest car, lived simply in Birmingham, trained in his basement gym, and appeared genuinely uninterested in the trappings of his own success. He loved bodybuilding. He loved being the best at it. That was enough. Many of the Californian athletes of that era had the cars and the lifestyle that came with them. The best bodybuilder in the world, by contrast, showed no interest in any of it. That contrast between Shawn's vocal, public, expressive approach to the sport and Dorian's silent, disciplined, result-focused one goes a long way toward explaining why their rivalry felt the way it did. They weren't just competing in a sport. They were competing as two fundamentally different kinds of people, with two fundamentally different ideas about what it means to be great. Dorian at 63 is a different person than the competitor who dominated the Olympia stage through the 90s. He practices yoga daily. He has spoken openly about the benefits of meditation and altered states of consciousness. He is frank about his steroid use during his career, about the health problems it contributed to, and about what he would have done differently. He does not suggest his era of bodybuilding was healthy. It wasn't. And he is clear about that. But he does not regret the path, the detention center, the weights, the years at Temple Gym, the 6 sandals. He has described his career-ending injuries as a turning point that forced him out of a sport that had begun to feel like an obligation, and pushed him toward a broader, more fulfilling life. When asked about Shawn Ray today, the hostility is gone. What remains looks, from the outside, a great deal like respect, the kind that can only develop between two people who spent years competing against each other at the highest level of their sport, and came out the other side with their regard for each other intact.